The sun hung low in the sky, burning the earth with a harsh, endless heat. The land below it was cracked and dry, as if it had forgotten what rain felt like. Dust moved slowly through the air, carried by a weak wind that offered no comfort. This was a village where hope had become as rare as water. Small huts stood close together, made of mud and broken wood. Their walls leaned as if they were too tired to stand straight. The fields nearby were empty, once full of crops, now nothing but dry soil and dead roots. Even the animals had grown thin. Some had already disappeared. In this quiet and struggling village lived a young boy. He couldn't have been more than 9 years old. His body was small, too small for his age. His cheeks were hollow, and his clothes hung loosely on him. Dust covered his bare feet, and his steps were slow, as if each one cost him strength he didn't have. But his eyes told a different story. They were tired, yes, but also strong. There was something inside him that refused to give up. The boy walked along the edge of the village, holding a small piece of bread tightly in his hand. It was dry and hard, barely enough for a single meal. But to him, it was everything. He had spent the whole day working for it. Earlier that morning, before the sun had fully risen, he had gone from house to house, asking for work. Most people had nothing to give. Some didn't even open their doors. Others looked at him with pity but turned away. Hunger had made everyone selfish. Finally, an old man had asked him to carry a heavy bundle of wood across the village. The boy had done it without complaint, even though his legs shook and his back ached. When he finished, the man handed him the small piece of bread. That was his reward. Now, as he walked home, he held it carefully, as if it might disappear if he loosened his grip. His stomach twisted with hunger. It had been days since he last ate a full meal. The smell of the bread, even though it was plain and dry, filled his senses. For a moment, he almost stopped walking. Almost. But then, he kept going. At the far end of the village stood a fragile hut. Its roof was uneven, patched with pieces of cloth and straw. The walls had cracks that let in both wind and dust. It looked like it could fall apart at any moment. This was his home. Inside, lying on a thin mat, was his mother. She was weak and pale, her breathing slow and uneven. Illness had taken her strength, leaving her unable to work, unable to even stand for long. Some days, she could barely speak. The boy paused outside the hut before entering. He looked down at the bread in his hand. His stomach growled again, louder this time. For a brief moment, his face tightened. His eyes closed, and he swallowed hard, as if trying to push away the hunger. The pain was not just in his body, it was in his thoughts, in his heart. Hunger had become a constant shadow, following him everywhere. But when he opened his eyes again, his expression changed. The pain was gone. In its place was something softer, something stronger. He stepped inside the hut. His mother turned her head slightly, her tired eyes meeting his. Even in her weakness, she tried to smile. "You're back," she whispered. The boy nodded quickly, hiding the exhaustion in his face. He forced a small smile, as if everything was okay. "Yes, Mother," he said gently. He moved closer to her, still holding the bread behind his back. For a moment, he just stood there, watching her. His eyes filled with emotion, but he blinked it away. He didn't want her to see his pain. He didn't want her to worry. Because in this broken home, in this life filled with struggle, he was the one who had to stay strong. Slowly, he brought the bread forward. The small piece of bread, dry, simple, and fragile, seemed to carry the weight of their entire world. It was not just food. It was survival. It was hope. And it was the only thing standing between them and another night of hunger. The boy looked at it one more time, his fingers tightening slightly around its edges. Outside, the wind whispered through the cracks of the hut, carrying the silence of a village that had almost given up. Inside, a quiet moment hung in the air. A moment that would soon lead to a choice, one that would change everything. The boy stepped out of the hut slowly, the dry ground crunching beneath his feet. The small piece of bread was still in his hand. He had not eaten it. Not yet. Behind him, his mother rested in silence, her weak breathing filling the small space. He had told her he would return soon. He didn't explain why he stepped outside again. Maybe he didn't even understand it himself. The sun was beginning to fade, but the heat still clung to the air. The village looked even more tired than before. Shadows stretched across the empty paths, and the wind carried dust through the quiet homes. The boy walked forward, his steps unsteady. His eyes stayed on the bread. His stomach tightened painfully. It felt as if something inside him was pulling, begging, demanding. He could almost taste it already. Just one bite, he thought. Just one. He slowed down. His hand lifted slightly. But before he could bring the bread to his mouth, he heard something. A soft sound. Not the wind. Not footsteps. A weak, broken voice. The boy froze. He turned his head slowly, his eyes searching the empty path beside him. Near the edge of the road, under the thin shade of a dying tree, someone lay on the ground. An old man. His body was curled slightly, his clothes torn and covered in dust. His face was pale, his lips dry and cracked. His hands trembled as they pressed weakly against the ground, as if trying to push himself up, but failing. The boy stepped closer, ostorozhno, his heart beating faster. The old man lifted his head just enough to see him. Their eyes met. In that moment, the boy felt something shift inside him. The man's eyes were filled with pain, but also something deeper. Desperation. A silent plea. The boy swallowed hard. "Please," the old man whispered, his voice barely there. "Food." Just one word. But it hit harder than anything. The boy's grip on the bread tightened. His stomach growled loudly, almost in protest. He looked down at the bread, then back at the man. The man's body shook slightly, as if he didn't have the strength to hold himself together any longer. The boy's chest rose and fell quickly. A battle had begun inside him. His mind filled with thoughts, fast, loud, overwhelming. If I give this away, what will I eat? What about Mother? She needs food too. He remembered her lying on the mat. Weak. Pale. Smiling even when she had no strength. He remembered the nights they went to sleep hungry. The pain. The emptiness. The fear. His hand slowly moved closer to his chest, pulling the bread away protectively. For a moment, he almost turned away. His body even shifted slightly, as if ready to leave. But then, the old man coughed weakly and collapsed back onto the ground. That sound stopped him. The boy closed his eyes tightly. His breathing grew heavier. This was not just about hunger anymore. This was something else. Something deeper. A choice. A painful, impossible choice. He opened his eyes again, but this time, they were different. Still tired. Still hungry. But softer. Quieter. Stronger. Slowly, very slowly, he stepped closer to the old man. His hand trembled as he reached forward. For a brief moment, he hesitated again. The bread felt heavier now. Not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. His survival. His only chance to eat. His only comfort after days of suffering. The boy looked at it one last time. Then, without a word, he placed it gently into the old man's shaking hands. The old man stared at it, as if he couldn't believe it was real. Then he looked up at the boy, his eyes filling with something that words could not express. Gratitude. Relief. Life. The boy didn't wait. He stepped back quickly, almost as if staying longer would make it harder. The sound of the old man eating, slow, desperate, filled the quiet air behind him. The boy turned away. And walked. Each step felt heavier than before. His body was weaker now. The little strength he had left seemed to fade with every step. His stomach ached more sharply than ever, twisting and burning. But the pain inside him was no longer just hunger. It was something mixed. Something confusing. He kept walking, his eyes fixed on the ground. A small part of him whispered, "You made a mistake." Another voice, softer but steady, whispered back, "No, you did what was right." Tears filled his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He didn't know what to feel. Regret, because he was still hungry. Peace, because he had helped someone. Fear, because he didn't know what would happen next. The village around him remained silent, unaware of the quiet battle that had just taken place. By the time he reached his hut again, the sky had grown darker. The wind moved softly through the broken walls. The boy paused at the entrance. His hands were empty now. Slowly, he looked down at them. Then he closed his fingers tightly, as if trying to hold on to something that was no longer there. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The night was waiting, and with it, the weight of his choice. The boy stepped inside the hut slowly, careful not to make noise. The dim light from outside barely reached the corners of the room. Shadows covered the walls, moving gently as the wind slipped through the cracks. The air felt colder now, heavier than before. His mother was still lying on the mat. Her eyes opened the moment she heard him. "You came back," she said softly, her voice weak but warm. The boy nodded, forcing a small smile onto his face. "Yes, Mother." He stayed near the door for a moment, as if unsure how to move forward. His hands hung by his sides, empty. His mother noticed. Her eyes shifted slightly, searching his face, then his hands. There was no bread. A quiet pause filled the room. "Did you find something to eat?" she asked gently. The question was simple, but it felt heavy. The boy quickly looked away. "Not much," he said, his voice low. I wasn't hungry." The words came out too fast, too forced. Even he could hear it. His mother didn't respond right away. She simply watched him, her tired eyes soft but knowing. She had lived long enough to understand silence, and what hides behind it. The boy walked a few steps closer, then sat down on the ground, keeping his distance. His back leaned against the wall as he pulled his knees close to his chest. His stomach twisted again, sharper this time. He pressed his arm against it, trying to hide the pain. For a while, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the wind and their quiet breathing filled the space. Then, softly, "You gave it away, didn't you?" The boy froze. His eyes widened slightly. He didn't look up. He didn't answer. But the silence said everything. His mother let out a slow breath. Not of anger, but of understanding. "Tell me," she said gently. The boy's lips trembled. He tried to stay strong, like he always did. But something inside him was too heavy now. Slowly, he lifted his head. "There was a man," he whispered. "He was worse than us." His voice began to shake. He couldn't even stand. He asked for food, and he paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't know what to do." Tears filled his eyes, but he kept speaking. "I wanted to keep it, Mother. I really did. I was so hungry. I thought about you too. I thought maybe we could share it." His hands clenched tightly, but he looked like he was going to die. The last words broke something inside him. "I couldn't walk away." Silence followed. Heavy, deep. The boy lowered his head, ashamed, unsure. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have brought it home." For a moment, there was no response. Then, a weak hand reached out and rested gently on his shoulder. The boy looked up. His mother was watching him, her eyes filled with tears, but also something else. Pride. "You did not do wrong," she said softly. Her voice was calm, even though her body was weak. "You did something many people cannot do, even when they have plenty." The boy stared at her, confused. "But we have nothing," he said. "And now, we have even less." A small, sad smile appeared on her face. "Maybe," she said. "But what you gave was not just bread." Her eyes softened. "You gave kindness when it hurt the most." The boy didn't know how to respond. Her words warmed something inside him, but they didn't take away the hunger. They didn't take away the fear. "What will we eat tomorrow?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air. His mother had no answer. Her hand slowly dropped back to her side. "I don't know," she admitted. That truth made the room feel even colder. The night grew deeper. The wind became stronger, slipping through every crack in the hut. The thin walls offered little protection. The boy lay down beside his mother on the hard ground, pulling a worn cloth over them. But it did little to keep them warm. Or full. His stomach ached constantly now, a dull, endless pain. He turned slightly, trying to ignore it. Beside him, his mother's breathing was slow and uneven. The boy stared into the darkness. His mind refused to rest. Did I do the right thing? The question echoed again and again. He remembered the bread in his hand. The smell. The feeling. Then the old man's face. The trembling hands. The desperate eyes. The boy shut his eyes tightly. His heart felt torn between two truths. He had helped someone, but he had also left himself, and his mother, with nothing. A tear slipped quietly down his cheek, disappearing into the cold night. Outside, the village was silent. No voices. No movement. Just the sound of the wind and the quiet weight of survival. But beneath that silence, something unseen was shifting. Something neither the boy nor his mother could understand. Not yet. The night held its breath, as if waiting. And in that darkness, between hunger and hope, a quiet change had already begun. Morning came quietly, but it did not feel the same. The first light of the sun slipped through the cracks of the hut, falling softly across the boy's face. Normally, mornings in the village felt heavy, slow and empty, just like the days before them. But today, something was different. The boy stirred slightly, his body stiff from the cold night. Hunger still sat deep inside him, a dull ache that had not left. His eyes opened slowly. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then he heard it. Voices. Not one or two, but many. Low murmurs. Quick whispers. The sound of feet moving across dry ground. The boy frowned. That was not usual. The village was rarely this active in the early morning. Most people stayed inside, saving their energy. There was never much reason to gather. But now, it sounded like something was happening. He pushed himself up slowly, his body weak but alert. Beside him, his mother was still resting, her eyes half open as she listened too. "Do you hear that?" he asked quietly. She nodded faintly. "Yes," she whispered. "Something is going on." The boy stood up, moving toward the door. His steps were careful, almost hesitant. A strange feeling had begun to grow inside him, not fear exactly, but something close to it. Curiosity, mixed with unease. As he reached the doorway, the sound became clearer. People were gathered outside, talking, whispering. Some voices carried excitement. Others sounded shocked. The boy stepped out into the light and stopped. A small crowd had formed not far from his hut. Men, women, even children, standing together, looking toward the center of the village road. Some covered their mouths as they spoke. Others pointed, their eyes wide. This was not normal. Not in a place where people barely had the strength to speak. The boy's heart began to beat faster. He took a few steps forward, trying to understand what was happening. "What is it?" he asked a woman nearby. She barely looked at him, her voice quick and breathless. "Something strange," she said. "Someone important, someone powerful." The boy's brow tightened. "Who?" But the woman shook her head. "No one knows for sure. They say, a traveler, but not an ordinary one." The boy felt a small chill run through him. A traveler. His mind flickered for a moment, but he pushed the thought away. It couldn't be. He stepped closer to the crowd, trying to see past the people standing in front. More whispers reached his ears. "They say he collapsed yesterday. Someone helped him. He's not who he seemed to be. A man like that, here." Each sentence added more confusion, more tension. The boy's chest tightened. His thoughts began to race now. Collapsed. Yesterday. Helped. A quiet memory rose in his mind. An old man. Shaking hands. A weak voice asking for food. The boy froze. His breathing slowed. No, it can't be. Before he could think further, a loud voice cut through the crowd. "Where is the boy?" The murmurs stopped instantly. Silence spread like a wave. The boy's heart jumped. "Find him," the voice continued. "He must be here." The crowd shifted slightly, people looking around, searching. The boy stepped back without thinking. A sudden fear gripped him. Why are they looking for me? His hands felt cold. He glanced around, unsure whether to hide or step forward. Then, a man near the front turned and pointed directly at him. "There," he said. "That's him." All eyes moved at once. The boy felt frozen in place. Dozens of faces stared at him, some curious, some surprised, some unreadable. He swallowed hard. His legs felt weak again, but this time not from hunger. From fear. A path slowly opened in the crowd, as people stepped aside. The boy stood alone now. Exposed. Unprepared. "Come forward," the same strong voice called. The boy hesitated. He glanced back toward his hut for a brief moment, as if looking for comfort. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. Each step felt heavy, uncertain. As he moved through the crowd, whispers followed him. That's the one. He looks so small. Is it really him? The boy kept his eyes low. His heart pounded in his chest. Finally, he reached the center. And then, he saw him. The old man. But he was no longer lying on the ground. He stood upright now, supported by two well-dressed men. His clothes had been changed. His face, though still tired, carried strength and dignity. Behind him stood others, people the boy had never seen before. Their clothes were clean, their posture confident. They did not belong to this village. This was no ordinary group. The boy's breath caught. The old man looked at him. And slowly, he smiled. Not weakly, not desperately, but with deep recognition. In that moment, the boy understood. The whispers, the gathering, the strange energy in the air. It all led here. You, the old man said, his voice now steady, clear. The boy's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know what this meant. All he knew was that something had changed. Something big. Something he never expected. The crowd leaned in, waiting. The air felt still, heavy with anticipation. The boy stood there, hungry, tired, confused, on the edge of a truth that was about to change everything. The village stood still. No one spoke. All eyes were fixed on the boy, and the man standing before him. The boy's heart pounded loudly in his chest. His hands felt cold, and his thoughts moved too fast to understand. Just yesterday, this man had been lying weak on the ground, barely able to speak. Now, everything about him felt different. Stronger. Important. The old man took a slow step forward, still supported, but steady enough to stand tall. You remember me, he said gently. The boy nodded, his throat dry. Words refused to come. He tried to speak, but stopped. The old man's eyes softened. You gave me your bread, he continued. Your only bread. A ripple moved through the crowd. People looked at each other, whispering again, but this time, the whispers carried surprise, even disbelief. His last bread, someone murmured. The boy lowered his eyes. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel special. He only felt exposed. I didn't know who you were, the boy said quietly. You just needed help. The old man smiled again, but this time, there was emotion behind it. Deep and real. That, he said softly, is exactly why this matters. The boy looked up, confused. The old man raised his hand slightly, signaling the people behind him. One of the well-dressed men stepped forward. My master, he began, his voice clear and respectful, is not a poor traveler. The crowd leaned in closer. He is a man of great wealth and influence, the man continued. He has traveled across many lands, not to show his power, but to understand people. The boy's eyes widened slightly. The villagers whispered louder now. A test, someone said. Yes, the man confirmed. A test of kindness. The old man nodded slowly. I have seen many places, he said. Many people. Some with plenty, yet they refuse to share. Some with little, yet they still turn away. He paused, his gaze resting gently on the boy. But yesterday, he continued, I saw something rare. The air felt heavier now. You had nothing, the old man said. And still, you gave. The boy's chest tightened. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't even know what this moment meant. Then, the old man turned slightly and gestured again. From behind him, several men stepped forward, carrying large sacks and wooden boxes. They placed them carefully on the ground in front of the crowd. A soft gasp spread through the villagers. Food. Grain. Fresh bread. More than anyone had seen in a long time. The boy stared at it, his mind struggling to understand. This, the old man said, is for you. The boy blinked. For me. And your mother, the man added. The boy's breath caught. My mother. Another man stepped forward, holding a small case. Inside this, he said, are medicines. Proper treatment. Enough to help her recover. The boy's hands trembled. For a moment, the world around him seemed to fade. All he could think about was his mother, lying weak, unable to stand. The long nights. The fear. The helplessness. And now. Help. Real help. His voice broke. I don't understand. The old man stepped closer, his expression gentle. You are not being rewarded for kindness, he said softly. You are being honored for your humanity. Tears filled the boy's eyes. He shook his head slightly. But I almost didn't give it, he admitted. I was scared. I was hungry. The old man nodded. That is what makes it real, he said. Kindness means little when it costs nothing. The boy stood still, overwhelmed. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel deserving. But something inside him began to shift. Something warm. Something strong. Behind him, a familiar voice called out weakly. My son. The boy turned quickly. His mother stood at the edge of the crowd, supported by a neighbor. She looked fragile, but her eyes were wide with emotion. Mother, the boy whispered. He ran to her side, helping her stand. What is all this? She asked, her voice shaking. The boy struggled to explain. He's the man from yesterday, he said. The one I told you about. Her eyes moved to the old man. Understanding slowly filled her face. Then tears came. You gave away your food, she said softly, looking at her son. The boy lowered his head. I'm sorry, he whispered. But before he could say more, she pulled him gently into her arms. No, she said, her voice breaking. Don't be sorry. Tears fell freely down her face. You gave what little we had, and still thought of someone else. Her grip tightened slightly. I am proud of you. The boy closed his eyes, holding on to her. For the first time in a long while. He didn't feel alone. Around them, the villagers watched in silence. But something had changed. The same people who once ignored them, who pitied them, now looked at the boy differently. With respect. With quiet admiration. One man stepped forward slowly. We didn't see him, he admitted. Not really. Another nodded. We were too busy thinking about ourselves. The crowd grew quieter. The truth settled over them. The boy's simple act had done more than help one man. It had opened their eyes. The old man looked around at the village. Kindness, he said, is not measured by how much you give, but by what you give when you have nothing. His words stayed in the air. Deep. Powerful. Unforgettable. The boy stood beside his mother, still holding her hand. His stomach was still empty. His body still weak. But inside, something had changed forever. He had faced hunger, and still chosen kindness. And now, he understood something he never had before. Even in the darkest moments, even when there is nothing left, a single act of humanity can change everything. The wind moved gently through the village. But this time, it did not feel empty. It felt alive. And this was only the beginning. The village slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, but nothing felt the same anymore. Where there had once been silence filled with struggle, now there was movement. People walked with purpose. Small fires burned again. The smell of fresh food, real food, drifted through the air. And at the center of it all was the boy. Not because he asked for attention, but because people could not stop thinking about what he had done. Near his small hut, sacks of grain were carefully stacked. Clean water had been brought in. A few villagers helped repair the broken walls, strengthening the place that once looked ready to fall apart. Inside, his mother rested on a better bed, covered with a proper blanket. The medicine had already begun to help. Her breathing was steadier now. Her face, though still tired, carried more life than before. The boy sat quietly near the doorway, watching everything. His hands rested on his knees. His eyes moved slowly, from the food, to the people, to his mother. It all felt unreal. Just a day ago, he had nothing. Nothing but hunger. Nothing but fear. And now, everything had changed. He lowered his head slightly, his thoughts heavy. Why did this happen? He wondered. Not with excitement, but with quiet confusion. He remembered the moment clearly, the bread in his hand, the pain in his stomach, the old man's weak voice. He hadn't thought about rewards. He hadn't imagined this. He had only seen someone in need. That's all it was, he whispered softly to himself. His fingers tightened slightly. I didn't do it for this. The words felt important. Real. For a moment, he looked at the sacks of food again. A small fear crept into his chest. What if this changes me? He had lived his whole life with nothing. Hunger had taught him to endure, to survive, to stay humble. But now, what if comfort made him forget? What if having more made him like the others, people who once turned him away? The thought unsettled him. He stood up slowly, stepping outside. The air felt lighter today. The sky looked softer. But inside him, something was still searching for balance. As he walked a few steps away from the hut, he noticed something. A younger child sat near the edge of the path. Thin, dusty, watching others eat, but not moving. The boy stopped. For a moment, he simply looked. The scene felt familiar. Too familiar. He saw himself in that child. The same hunger. The same quiet pain. The same waiting, hoping someone would notice. The boy's chest tightened. Without thinking too much, he turned back toward his hut. He picked up a small piece of bread from one of the sacks. Not the whole sack. Not more than needed. Just one piece. He walked back slowly and stood in front of the child. The child looked up, surprised. The boy didn't say anything. He simply held out the bread. The child hesitated, then took it carefully, as if afraid it might disappear. Their eyes met for a brief second. No words, but understanding. The boy gave a small nod and turned away. As he walked back, something inside him felt clear again. Calm. Steady. This was who he was. Not because of reward. Not because of recognition. But because it was right. He returned to the doorway of his hut and sat down again. This time, his thoughts were quieter. He understood something now. Kindness is not a trade. It is not something you give to receive. It is something you choose. Even when it hurts. Even when no one is watching. Inside the hut, his mother looked at him, a soft smile on her face. She had seen what he did. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The boy looked out at the village once more. Life was changing. But he would not. Not in the way that mattered. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, the boy held on to the one thing that had brought him here. A heart that chose kindness, no matter the cost. Days passed, and for the first time in a long while, each day felt lighter than the one before. The harsh silence that once filled the village had softened. There was still struggle, still hardship, but now there was something else growing quietly in its place. Hope. Inside the small hut, change was even more visible. The boy sat near his mother, watching her closely. She was sitting up. Not lying weak and still, not struggling to breathe, but sitting. It was a small thing. Yet, to the boy, it felt like a miracle. Are you tired? He asked gently, his voice careful, almost afraid the moment might break. His mother smiled softly. A little, she admitted, but not like before. Her voice was still weak, but stronger than it had been in days. The boy's eyes filled with quiet emotion. He tried to hide it, but this time, he didn't turn away. You look better, he said. She looked at him with warmth, her gaze full of something deeper now. So do you, she replied. The boy blinked, surprised. Me? She nodded slowly. You're not just surviving anymore, she said. You're living. The words settled into him. Living. It felt strange, but right. For so long, every day had been about making it through. Finding food. Fighting hunger. Hiding fear. But now, for the first time, he didn't wake up with panic in his chest. He didn't feel that sharp, constant pain in his stomach. He didn't have to choose between himself and someone else just to survive. The weight he had carried for so long had begun to lift. The boy looked down at his hands. They were still small. Still rough from work. But they no longer felt empty. His mother reached for his hand and held it gently. Come here, she said softly. He moved closer, sitting beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Their silence was no longer heavy with fear. It was full of peace. I was so worried, she whispered after a while. Not just about food, but about you. The boy looked at her, confused. Me? She nodded. You had to grow up too fast, she said. You carried more than a child should. Her fingers tightened slightly around his hand. But even then, you chose kindness. Her voice trembled slightly. "That is something I will never forget." The boy felt his chest tighten. "I was scared," he admitted quietly. "That day. I didn't know what would happen." His mother smiled gently. "Courage is not about being unafraid," she said. "It's about doing what is right, even when you are afraid." The boy let those words settle deep inside him. For the first time, he began to see himself differently. Not just as a hungry child. Not just as someone struggling to survive. But as someone who made a choice. A choice that mattered. Outside the hut, life moved with quiet energy. Children played again, their laughter soft but real. People shared food, spoke kindly, helped one another in small ways. The boy stepped outside later that day. The sun felt warmer now, not harsh, not burning, but gentle. He looked around the village. People noticed him. Some nodded respectfully. Others smiled. He wasn't invisible anymore. But more than that. He wasn't just seen. He was remembered. Not for what he received, but for what he gave. A man passing by paused for a moment. "You've reminded us of something important," he said simply, before continuing on. The boy watched him go, unsure how to respond. But inside, something steady had formed. He stood taller now. Not because he had more food. Not because life had become easy. But because he understood something deeper. He had faced hunger, and still chosen humanity. He had faced fear, and still chosen compassion. He turned back toward the hut, where his mother waited. This place, once filled with pain and silence, now held warmth, connection, healing. The boy stepped inside again, a quiet smile on his face. The journey that began with hunger had led to something far greater. And in that moment, the boy was no longer just surviving his story. He had become a part of something bigger, a symbol of hope, in a place that had almost forgotten what hope felt like. Time moved forward, but the story did not fade. What happened in the small, forgotten village did not stay hidden for long. At first, it was just whispers. Travelers passing through carried the story with them. A few words here, a short telling there. People spoke of a hungry boy who gave away his last piece of bread. Some added details. Some changed parts. But one thing always remained the same. The boy had nothing. And still, he chose to give. As days turned into weeks, the story began to travel farther. It reached nearby villages, then towns beyond them. People who had never seen the boy began to speak about him. Not as someone who was lucky. Not as someone who received help. But as someone who made a choice when it mattered most. Back in the village, life continued to grow stronger. The land slowly began to recover. The people worked together more than before. Where there had once been silence and struggle, there was now quiet cooperation. And at the heart of it all was the boy. He did not try to stand out. He did not ask for attention. In fact, he stayed the same. Each morning, he woke early. He helped his mother, who now walked slowly but steadily on her own. He worked alongside others, carrying water, fixing huts, sharing food when needed. And whenever he saw someone hungry, he never looked away. One afternoon, as the sun rested softly in the sky, a group of travelers entered the village. Their clothes showed they had come from far away. Their faces carried curiosity. They had heard the story. They asked quietly, "Where is the boy?" The villagers pointed toward a small hut at the edge of the path. When the travelers approached, they did not find a hero standing tall. They found a simple boy, kneeling on the ground, helping a younger child tie a piece of cloth around his foot. The boy looked up, slightly surprised by their presence. "Yes?" he asked gently. One of the travelers stepped forward. "We heard about you," he said. "About what you did." The boy lowered his eyes for a moment. "It was nothing," he replied softly. But the travelers shook their heads. "No," the man said. "It was everything." The boy didn't respond. Because in his heart, he still saw it as a simple moment. A choice. Nothing more. And maybe that was what made it so powerful. The travelers stayed for a short time, watching, learning. When they left, they carried more than just a story. They carried a message. A reminder that even in places filled with struggle, even in lives touched by pain, there is still room for kindness. That night, the The boy sat outside his hut, looking up at the sky. The stars were clearer now, brighter. The air felt calm. His mother sat beside him, her presence warm and steady. "People are talking about you," she said softly. The boy smiled a little. "I don't understand why," he replied. She looked at him gently. "Because what you did is rare." He thought about that for a moment. Then he shook his head slightly. "It didn't feel rare," he said. "It just felt right." His mother smiled. "And that," she said, "is what makes it special." The boy looked out across the village. He saw people sharing food, helping each other, smiling more than before. A quiet change had taken root. Not from wealth, not from power, but from a single act of compassion. He took a slow breath. His journey had begun with hunger, with fear, with uncertainty, but it had led to something far greater than he ever imagined. Not just for him, but for everyone around him. And maybe, even beyond. The boy closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the gentle night around him. Then he opened them again, a quiet strength in his gaze. Because now he understood something simple, yet powerful. Kindness given in the darkest moment does not disappear. It grows. It travels. It returns as light. And sometimes, it changes lives in ways no one could ever expect. The wind moved softly through the village, carrying that truth forward. A story born from hunger had become a legacy. And in that legacy lived a reminder that even the smallest act of compassion can change a destiny forever.